Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another exciting episode. So today's video is about Entity Framework Core. Now, Entity Framework is an integral part of the .NET ecosystem, and I'm pretty sure that if you work on the .NET ecosystem, you use CSharp, you build web APIs, you build desktop applications, you would have encountered a use case where you had to interact with DB using Entity Framework. And when you use it, you get to know the nuisances that you come across with the data loading mechanism it has got. So in this video, we are going to clear those things up and get a solid understanding of early loading, lazy, and the explicit loading. Alright, so with this said, with this context set, let's actually start building up and let's see what these things are. Alright, so I've got a very simple solution over here. It is the ASP.NET Core MVC solution. And if we look at the models over here, I've got the students model. Now this has got three fields: ID, which is the primary key over here, and then we have got the student name, and then we have got the subjects collection. Okay, now what the subjects collection is, subjects collection or the subjects table over here is another table. And if you look at the properties here, the columns, it has got a primary key of ID, then there is a subject name, and then this is my navigation property to the students table. Okay, so this is a foreign key, the student ID, and then it has got a student object also, a property that is going to hold the student object for me. All right, now after that I've gone to my program.cs and I have added this application DB context, and to the options I am saying that use the SQL server and get this connection string, which is called my constring. And if I go to my program.cs, my app settings.cs over here, you will see that this is my connection string, which has got a local DB as the server. And then this is my database name, which is called EFCore demo 1. So this is in all the solution structure that we are going to use to figure out what is lazy loading, early or eager loading, and then the explicit loading. Okay, so now in this application DB context, I've got this method called onModelCreating, inside which I am seeding some data into my database. So if you look over here, I've got three students, Tom, Joe, and Harry, with IDs 1 and 2, 1, 2, and 3 respectively. And for student ID 1, which is Tom, I've got three subjects: math, physics, and computer, each with their own primary key, that is 1 to 3, ID 1 to 3. Similarly for Joe, which is student ID 2, I've got another two subjects, and then very same for Harry, I've got two more subjects. Okay, so this is how I'm seeding some data into my database. Now this is a typical Entity Framework Core setup, and now if I try to run the migrations, let's see what happens. So I should now see the migrations folder coming up, and yes, it has come up. A new migrations folder has been created and my migration is listed over here. Okay, so now if you see, it has created this table called students and the subject. It has added the ID column, the name, and the primary key constraint. Then it has got a subjects with table with ID, subject name, and a student ID. It has added a primary key and a foreign key. Then this is what we wanted. And then it has inserted these. Cool. So this looks good. Now let's just update the database. It should run, and yes, so finally it is executing these queries and it is done. Now let us open let us open our database, and if I go to my database, I've got this EFCore demo 1. Let's look at the tables, and I have got the students table, which has got the following three students that we seeded. And if you go to the subjects, it has seeded these. Okay, so we have, in fact, I have misspelled the subjects. I have eaten up the B over here, but anyhow, you get the context right. Okay, cool. So this is how the setup will be. Now we can actually start learning the early binding and eager binding and all those kind of things. Okay, so now let's come to this home controller over here, and if you look at this controller, it is the plain MVC controller. It has got an index method, and inside which we are actually going to use our DB context and get some records from the database. So for that, I would need the application DB context over here. So let me add that. Okay, so let's just call it underscore D. and let's add a constructor. So I do CTOR and then double tap and I will get the constructor out of the box. We add it and then let's just assign the underscore DB to DB. Okay, so now inside the index method, let's add an enumerable of student and let's call it all students is equal to underscore DB dot students. So I should get all my students into this all students property or the object over here. And then let's count the student. Cool. Now let me run this and let's add a breakpoint to this place. And there is a console that has come up. So if we look at this console, it will actually show us what queries are being sent to SQL for execution. Now, as of now or up till now, I don't see any query being listed in this console window over here. That means nothing has happened on the SQL side. Now let's move a step forward and this line is now executed, and if we look back at the console, I still don't see anything being logged into the console. And now if I execute the next statement, which is all students.count, I see that I get a query being logged into my console. So this is the place where the actual query hit the SQL server. Now, thing to note over here is the query didn't actually execute it until we wanted to actually use the results. Now, all students were populated into this, or the plan was set into this all students property over here, but the query didn't execute it on the SQL side. So this is called deferred execution or the lazy loading in EntityFramework. The query only hit the DB when we actually wanted the result. That is when we did count. So until unless you do a count, you do a .any or you try to iterate over these results, the query will not be executed. Anyhow, let's look at the results over here of all students. We see that I've got the result view and over here I've got the ID, I've got the name, but I've not got any subjects. Now, if you recall, let's go back to the solution, and if you recall, students had the subjects collection over here, and the subjects collection had the student as the foreign key into it. So deferred loading also says that any of the child table elements will not be populated. And that is the reason we are calling it lazy loading. It helps you improve the performance by not bringing in all the child data into your hit from the DB. I hope that makes sense. All right, so let me end this. Does that mean that every time I do a lazy loading or I do a deferred execution, I'll never be able to get the child object? Well, that is not the case, and what we are going to see now will actually also tell us or show us instances why lazy loading or a deferred execution can be a bad choice at places. Okay. So now in order to get the child objects for each of my students, what I'll have to do is I'll have to iterate over all my students one by one. And then, or I'll have to iterate over my subjects, look for that student ID and then get the subjects for that. So how do I do it? What I do is, okay, for each, I'm going to say var student in all students, and then I'm going to get a handle to that student dot subject. And then I'm going to assign it to the subjects. And how do I do that? I get the DB context again. Now I'm going to read my subjects table dot where x dot id equal or x dot student id should be equal to student dot id, and then I'm going to do a to list over here. Okay, so over here I'm going to read my subjects table. For each of the subject, I'm going to find that subject where the student ID is equal to the ID of this student over here. So I'm going to iterate over all my students over here and then read my subjects table, find out that student and then assign the subjects to my student over here. So this very obviously this loop will happen number of times I have got any student. So if my all student has 3, this loop will execute 3 times. If my all students has 3 million records, this loop is going to happen for 3 million times, right? So this is where eager loading or lazy loading or deferred execution becomes a bad choice. But let's anyhow see this in action. Okay, let me also bring up the console. All right, and let's execute this. Okay, so now because I've done a to list over here, I'm actually realizing my results. So the query has executed over here. And then now when I count it, it is not going to execute again. It is going to use this list of all students, and we have got the list of all students over here. And now if I iterate this loop, you will see that the another query executed where this student ID was picked up. It was looked up in the subjects table, and we have got the subjects assigned over here. Let's execute it again, or let me just add a breakpoint over here. Let me continue, and we will see that we get 1, 2, and then 3 hits being done to the DB, apart from the hit that was done to get all these students. So we see that we get n plus 1 hits whenever we want to load the child objects also for the student whenever we are doing lazy loading. And now if we look at all students, we'll see that it has got the subjects. Tom has got 3 subjects, and if we expand that, we see that maths is there, physics is there, and then computer is also there. So for all the students, now I get the subjects. So this is how lazy loading or deferred execution happens, and this is what makes it a bad choice. Okay, so now that we have seen how lazy loading or deferred execution happens, let's look at the other kind of loading that we have in EntityFrameworkCore. Let me comment this code, and let's look at what is called as eager loading. Now over here, we would again use a list of all students. We will get the students from the DB context, but then inside that we are going to do something called as include, and then inside that we are going to say subject, which is my child table for each of the students, and then I'm going to say dot toLess. And now let's run this and bring up the console, and over here if we see, now I'm going to hit the F10, and we'll look at the query that gets logged into this console. So it took a little while, and then now we see this query over here. It says select s.id, where s is student. It selects everything from the student. Then it also selects the student ID, which is actually s0, which is the subject. So it selects the student ID and the subject name from the subjects table by doing a left join, and then it is doing an order by all. So this is the query that gets logged into my console. That means it is doing a left join on the subjects table to get me everything about the students. And if we look at the all students over here, we would see that I've got my students, I've got my subjects also loaded this time, and these are the subjects that we get. So we see that eager loading will get you all the data for the required table that we are trying to query. Now this is what actually makes it a good choice also and a bad choice also. It all depends on the use case that you are working upon. So if you want to load all the child elements into the same shot, into the same query, you could do an eager loading, but that will get you all kinds of data, all the data from the child table also. So just keep that in mind. And let's say if you had another child table inside the table, what you could do then is, after you have done an include, just do a dot then include, and now you will be able to specify any other child element that you might have over there. So this is the comparison between lazy loading or deferred execution and eager loading. Okay, so there was just one query done, and we get all the results from all the tables by doing a left join. Alright, so now we have learned lazy loading, we have learned eager loading. What if we want a particular student? We don't want all the student, we want a particular student along with its subject. How do we do that? We do it using explicit loading, and this is what we are going to see next. So let me comment this again, and let me come back, and let's call it explicit loading. And over here, what I'm going to do is, I'm going to say get me a student from my DB context. I'm going to say first.default, where x.id equal 1. So this will give me a student whose ID is 1. Okay, and after that, what I'm going to say is use the DB context, and then I'm going to use this method called entry, pass in my student, and then I'm going to say get me the collection of its subjects, and then I'm going to call the load method on this. Okay, so what I've done is I've got the student from the DB context from my database whose ID is 1, and then I'm going to tell my DB context that okay, use this entry which we have got above student, and then for this entry get me the collection of subjects. Okay, so let me add a breakpoint. So now let's run this. We get the console. Let me minimize it. Let console here. Okay, and let's hit this. Okay, so we see that we get this command being hit on the DB, which is fine. We get the student whose ID is 1, and now if I do this again, I get another command being done, and this time it is also loading the subject where the student ID is there. So now if I look at the student over here, I would see that my subjects also are coming. So this is how explicit loading can be done, and you are asking it to load the collection into this entry of student. Okay, so now the other way is to use something called as dot reference. So instead of collection over here, I'll be calling this method called dot reference. So for that, let's go back to first of all the models that we had, and if we look at the subjects table over here, we had this navigation property for student ID, and then we had this reference object for storing the student. And if you look at the database, this is my subjects table. It had the student ID. So this was my navigation property. And using this, I can get the students and keep them into the student object, right? So let's go back to the controller. And over here, I'm going to first load my subject. So let's call it subject. From the DB context, I'm going to say subjects dot first or default xx dot id equal 1. So this will give me the subject which has got an ID of 1. And then from there, what I could do is db dot entry of my subject. But now instead of loading the collection, I'm going to load a reference of x dot student. And then I'm going to call the load method over here. And let me comment this first of all, and let's just hit this. Alright, so the console has come up. Let me bring it over here. Okay, and this is where my breakpoint has hit. I'm going to hit this, and we get our first query executed, getting the subject with ID of 1. But let's just explore it, and we see that my student is still null over here. I get everything else, but not the student for this subject. Let me do an F10. And now one more query executed, and I should now be able to see my student into this, which has been loaded as a reference, and I could see its particulars also. Cool. So this is how explicit loading will work. Now this explicit loading is very much similar to eager loading. So if you recall, in eager loading also, we were first loading the main table and then main table record, and then for that record that we wanted, for which we wanted the child element, we would hit the DB again to get it. In a very similar fashion, we are first making the call to a table and then getting the record for that table, and then for the child elements, I'm going to hit the DB again. So this is very much similar to eager loading. Alright, so I think this is pretty much about lazy loading, eager loading and explicit loading. Probably this should help you in answering all your interview questions also, and also get you a clear understanding of how these things work. So if you like this video, please hit that thumbs up button to show your appreciation. Subscribe to my channel if you want to follow along for more such .NET related stuff, and I'll see you in the next one. But until then, stay awesome.